Humans stared in horror as a massive 100-meter-long apex predator rampaged across the alien city, its razor-sharp claws and venomous bite leaving a trail of destruction and death in its wake. Entire buildings collapsed as the armored beast tore through them, the Varian natives screaming and fleeing in terror. In the cold void of space, the Terran Space Navy frigate TSS Valiant hurtled towards the planet Zephyr Prime, its powerful engines propelling it faster than light. Captain James Gordon, a 35-year-old human male renowned for his quick thinking and unorthodox tactics, paced the command deck impatiently. He had received an urgent summons from the Galactic Council, the message delivered by a towering 7-foot-tall blue-skinned Trill with 4 arms named Councillor Altair. The message had been cryptic, stating only that James's unique skills were needed immediately to confront a dire threat to the galaxy. As the Valiant dropped out of warp and descended towards the gleaming spires of the Council headquarters, James couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. What kind of threat could be so severe that the Council, with all its advanced technology and vast resources, would turn to him specifically for help? James strode into the Council chamber, his boots echoing on the polished marble floor. Altair and 11 other alien representatives, each more bizarre-looking than the last, regarded him solemnly. James noticed the grim, almost desperate expressions on their faces. Whatever this was, it was bad. "Captain Gordon, thank you for coming so quickly," Altair said, his deep voice resonating through the chamber. "I'm afraid we face a crisis that threatens the very survival of a budding civilization, and according to prophecy, you may be our only hope." James listened in growing disbelief as Altair explained the situation on Nexus. The unstoppable apex predator, the centuries of failed attempts to kill it, the untold devastation it had unleashed. He felt a chill run down his spine as Altair showed him video footage of the creature, effortlessly crushing entire city blocks, shrugging off volleys of advanced weapons fire like raindrops. "You want me to try to tame that thing?" James asked incredulously. "Only a human can subdue the apex predator," Altair said gravely. "The prophecy is clear. You are our last hope. If you can't tame or slay it, Nexus and the Varians will be destroyed, and the apex may then turn its attention to other worlds and species." James stood there, the weight of an entire alien species now resting on his shoulders. The fate of the Varians, of stopping a galactic extinction event in its tracks, all hinged on his ability to control or kill a beast that had wiped out whole worlds. This would either be his greatest triumph or his final mission. James raced through the gleaming corridors of the Valiant, the fate of the Varian race weighing heavily on him. He gathered his crack team in the frigate's briefing room: Mike Thompson, James's right-hand man known for his brilliant tactical mind, Dr. Lena Chen, a prodigy in alien creature biology, and John Macmillan, a grizzled special ops vet. "We've got 3 days until we reach Nexus," James said grimly, punching up classified reports on the room's holodisplay. "Let's use it to learn everything we can about this apex predator. We can't afford to go in blind." The team pored over the data with laser focus. Expedition logs, eyewitness accounts, biological scans. They consumed it all. The picture it painted was grim. "Its exoskeleton seems to be made of an unknown alloy," Dr. Chen said, enhancing a microscopic scan. "Incredibly dense molecular structure. No wonder bullets just bounce off." "We need a different approach," Mike mused. "What about that new prototype R&D cooked up, the quantum disruptor? Isn't it designed to shred things apart at the atomic level?" James's eyes lit up. "That could work. I'll get Councillor Altair to fast-track us one ASAP." 3 days later, the Valiant dropped out of warp over the besieged planet. A distress call immediately pierced the comm channels. A Varian settlement under attack. "Take us in now," James barked. "Grab your gear and get to the hangar. We're going in hot." The frigate swooped low over the burning settlement. Through the billowing smoke they saw it, the apex predator, a mountain of armor and claws and fury, smashing through buildings like they were made of cardboard. Varians ran screaming before it. James and his team hit the ground running, pulse rifles cracking, but the beast just shrugged off the hail of gunfire, its hide unscathed. It fixed its 6 merciless eyes on the humans and roared. "Fire the disruptor!" James shouted. Mike aimed the bulky weapon and squeezed the trigger. The disruptor hummed and died, its power cell depleted. Mike stared at it in horror. "Oh, shite!" The apex lunged at James, its razor claws flashing. James rolled but caught a glancing blow, pain lancing through his side. The monster whirled, preparing to pounce again. James scrambled backwards, his rifle lost, his team too far away to help. The beast's jaws opened wide, rows of serrated teeth dripping with venom, ready to crush him into paste and doom Nexus to extinction. James hit the dirt as the apex's claws tore through the air, missing his face by inches. He scrambled back, heart pounding. The creature's roar shook the ground as it prepared to pounce again. A plasma bolt suddenly seared past, striking the apex near one of its eyes. The beast recoiled with a screech of pain. James looked back to see Mac, his rifle smoking, already lining up another shot. "Aim for the eyes," James shouted. Mac fired again, but the apex was too quick, twisting its armored head to the side. The plasma went wide. "Damn it, it's too fast," Mac yelled back. "I can't get a clean shot." Suddenly Dr. Chen's voice crackled over their comms. "Captain, the apex's behavior, it's not random aggression. It seems to be defending something in that collapsed structure to your left." James rolled to his feet, pulse rifle at the ready. "Mike, lay down covering fire. Keep that thing busy while I check it out." Mike opened up with his rifle, peppering the apex with a barrage of shots. The creature roared in fury, temporarily distracted. James sprinted for the ruined building, leaping over rubble and debris. He ducked inside, sweeping the shadows with his rifle. There in the corner, a massive nest formed from twisted metal and stone, and nestled within, a single egg the size of a small car. "Holy shit," James breathed. "It's not a monster, it's a mother." "What about you?" Mike demanded over the sounds of plasma fire. "I'm going to try something crazy," James said. "Now get out of here, that's an order." As his team retreated, drawing the apex away, James lowered his rifle. He placed it on the ground and took a slow step back from the nest. A shadow fell over him. James looked up to see the apex looming in the doorway, its eyes blazing with protective fury. It took a menacing step forward, jaws parting to reveal venom-slick fangs. James very deliberately raised his empty hands. "Easy," he said, his suit's universal translator converting the words. "Easy. I'm not here to hurt you or your baby." Slowly, carefully, he took a step forward. The apex tensed but held its ground, watching him warily. James tapped his comm. "Dr. Chen, I need everything you've got on the apex's biology and behavior now. I think I'm making progress." "Incredible," Chen breathed. "It's not attacking, it really can understand you." James took another step, now within arm's reach of the apex. The creature shifted its bulk, still coiled to attack, but it made no move to do so. "I don't think it's just a dumb animal," James said wonderingly. "I think it's intelligent, maybe even sapient, and I think all this destruction, all these attacks, they're just a mother protecting her child." Very slowly, very gently, James reached out a hand. The apex growled low in its throat but didn't retreat. James held his breath and laid his palm on the creature's armored snout. He felt a shock like electricity jolt through him at the contact, and suddenly his mind was flooded with a burst of alien thoughts and emotions, fear, desperation, a fierce maternal love, and buried beneath it all, a vast, aching loneliness. "My God," James whispered, "you're the last of your kind, aren't you?" James felt a rush of emotions flood through him as he connected with the apex's mind. Through the link, Dr. Chen worked feverishly to establish communication. "The translation matrix is online," Chen said over comms. "We should be able to understand her now." A voice filled James's mind, ancient and powerful, tinged with sorrow. "I am the last," the apex said, My kind once roamed free on Nexus, in harmony with the land. Then the Varians came. Images flashed through James's mind, towering apex walking peacefully through lush forests, tending to nests filled with eggs. Then Varian ships descending, settlements expanding, driving the apex from their ancestral breeding grounds. They did not understand, the apex continued. Our nests, our territory, they built upon it, heedless of the balance. I had no choice but to fight. James's heart clenched. The apex wasn't a monster. She was a mother driven to desperation, lashing out to protect what little she had left. What if there was another way, James asked. What if we could find a new home for you and your offspring somewhere safe? Hope and skepticism warred in the apex's mind. You would do this? Why? Because I understand now, James said, and because it's the right thing to do. He disengaged from the link and turned to his team. Contact Altair and the Council. We need their support to relocate the apex to a protected reserve. Hours later, James stood before the assembled council, the apex waiting outside. Altair regarded him thoughtfully. Your proposal is unorthodox, the councillor said, but your results speak for themselves. You have our full support, Captain. James grinned, relief washing through him. They were really going to pull this off. Suddenly alarms blared, and Varian guards rushed into the chamber. Councillors, we're under attack, one shouted. Rogue hunters have breached the perimeter. James sprinted outside to find chaos erupting. A heavily armed Varian ship hovered over the apex's nest, disgorging a dozen battle-hardened warriors led by a scarred brute wielding a plasma cannon. Zax, one of the guards gasped. He's a fanatic obsessed with killing the apex. We have to stop him. James and his team leapt into action, pulse rifles cracking. The apex roared in challenge, placing herself between the hunters and her nest. Plasma bolts flew as the two sides clashed. James ducked and wove, dropping Varians with precise shots. Beside him, Mike and Mac laid down withering fire. But Zax's men were skilled, and they outnumbered James's team. A searing bolt caught James in the shoulder, spinning him to the ground. Through blurred vision, he saw Zax lining up a shot at the apex's exposed flank. James struggled to rise, to shout a warning, but his body wouldn't obey. He could only watch helplessly as Zax's finger tightened on the trigger. Only for the apex to whirl with startling speed, her tail lashing out like a whip. It caught Zax across the chest, sending him flying. The plasma cannon clattered to the ground. The apex stepped forward, placing herself squarely between James and the remaining hunters. She flared her armored plates and snarled, a clear challenge. Zax staggered to his feet, murder in his eyes. He snatched up a fallen rifle and charged with a blood-curdling scream. What happened next was a blur of tooth and claw and plasma. The apex was a maelstrom of destruction, her claws shearing through armor like paper, her tail crushing bones. James forced himself to one knee and added his rifle to the fray, driving the hunters back. It was over in minutes. Zax lay broken at the apex's feet, his remaining men scattered and groaning. Council guards moved in to secure the prisoners. The apex turned to James, her eyes gleaming with fierce intelligence. You protected my offspring, she said in his mind. Now I will trust you with our future. Days later, James watched from the Valiant's observation deck as the apex and her child were introduced to their new home, a vast nature reserve filled with towering trees and crystal-clear lakes. The apex paused at the edge of the reserve, her offspring frolicking at her feet. She turned to look up at the Valiant, and for a moment her eyes met James's. "Thank you," her voice whispered in his mind. "My child will know peace because of you." Then she turned and lumbered into the trees, her offspring scrambling after her. Within moments they were lost from view, vanishing into the tranquility of their new sanctuary. James smiled, a sense of profound satisfaction settling over him. They had done it. Against all odds, they had forged understanding between two species and saved a magnificent creature from extinction. As news of James Gordon's incredible success in pacifying the apex spread across the galaxy, the Valiant and its crew, found themselves inundated with urgent requests for aid. Besieged planets from the core worlds to the outer rim cried out for the special skills that only James and his team seemed to possess. The ability to resolve conflicts with deadly predators, not through extermination, but through understanding and coexistence. Seeing the dire need and the potential for lasting change, the Galactic Council moved swiftly. In an emergency session, they voted unanimously to establish the Interspecies Conflict Resolution Team, or ICRT, a special task force dedicated to tackling the most challenging predator threats in the galaxy. And there was only one logical choice to lead this elite unit: Captain James Gordon himself. James accepted the position with a solemn sense of duty, knowing the weight of responsibility that now rested on his shoulders. But he also felt a thrill of purpose, a bone-deep conviction that this was the role he was meant to play. With his trusted team at his side, Mike, Dr. Chen and Mac, he set out to forge a new path, to prove that even the most intractable conflicts could be solved without bloodshed. Their first mission took them to the windswept plains of Zephon, where a pack of creatures known as Ravagers had been terrorizing local settlements. These massive, wolf-like beasts were renowned for their cunning, their lightning speed, and their razor-sharp claws that could shred through metal like paper. As the Valiant touched down near the besieged capital city, James and his team were greeted by a scene of devastation. Buildings lay in ruins, smoke rising from scorched rubble, and the streets were empty, save for the occasional furtive figure darting from cover to cover. "My God," Mike breathed as they disembarked, pulse rifles at the ready. "It looks like a war zone." James nodded grimly, his eyes scanning the shattered cityscape. "The Ravagers did this, but there's more to this story, I can feel it. We need to find out what's really driving them to attack." Over the next several days, the team conducted an intensive investigation, interviewing survivors, studying sensor logs, and venturing out into the wilderness to observe the Ravagers in their natural habitat. What they discovered was startling. "The Ravagers aren't mindless killers," Dr. Chen reported, poring over a holographic map of the region. "They're highly intelligent, with a complex social structure. And look here, their traditional hunting grounds have been systematically encroached upon by Zephonian settlements. They're being squeezed out, their resources dwindling. It's no wonder they've lashed out." Armed with this knowledge, James set up a summit between the Zephonian leadership and representatives of the Ravager packs, a tricky feat of diplomacy given the years of bloodshed and mistrust between the two sides. But with patient negotiation and a healthy dose of the famed Gordon charm, he managed to broker a landmark agreement. The Zephonians would halt their expansion and work to restore the Ravagers' native habitats, while the Ravagers would cease their attacks and stick to designated hunting zones. It was a tense moment as the agreement was signed, Zephonian dignitaries and hulking Ravager alphas eyeing each other warily across the table. But as the ink dried and the room erupted in applause, James felt a swell of pride. They had done it, achieved peace without a single shot fired. But there was little time to rest on their laurels. No sooner had they departed Zephon than an urgent distress call came in from Aquaria, a planet covered almost entirely by ocean. Gargantuan sea monsters known as Leviathans had been attacking the underwater cities, causing untold destruction and loss of life. As the Valiant knifed through the churning alien seas, James studied the scant data they had on the Leviathans. Longer than a starship and armed with tentacles that could crush a submarine, they were a fearsome foe indeed. But James suspected that, as with the Ravagers, there was more to their aggression than met the eye. His intuition proved correct. With Dr. Chen's expertise in marine biology, they soon discovered that the Leviathan's attacks coincided with a recent surge in illegal deep-sea mining operations. The constant seismic disruptions from the mining were driving the normally reclusive creatures into a frenzy, disrupting their delicate mating cycles and sending them into a territorial rage. "We need to shut down those mining rigs," James declared, his jaw set with determination. "And we need to do it fast, before the Leviathans tear this whole planet apart." It was a daring raid, the team striking with surgical precision. They sabotaged the mining equipment, destroyed the illegal rigs, and captured the ringleaders behind the operation. With the disruptive mining halted, James reached out to the Leviathans, using the same techniques of communication and empathy that had worked with the Apex. Miraculously it worked. The attack ceased, and the Leviathans retreated to the deep ocean trenches. The Aquarians, overjoyed and grateful, signed a treaty pledging to protect the Leviathans' breeding grounds and to never again allow such destructive mining practices. As word of the ICRT's successes spread, demand for their services soared. They raced from planet to planet, resolving conflicts with predators of every imaginable shape and size. On each world, James and his team brought their unique approach to bear, not just brute force but understanding, communication and coexistence. And slowly, steadily the galaxy began to change. Sentient species that had once viewed the predators in their midst as mindless monsters now saw them as fellow inhabitants of their worlds, deserving of respect and protection. Ancient animosities gave way to new alliances, predator and prey learning to live side by side. At the heart of this transformation was James Gordon and his intrepid team, blazing a trail that would reshape the very fabric of galactic society. They had set out to save worlds, but in the end, they might just redeem the entire galaxy. James and his team stepped out of the Valiant onto the surface of Asteria, a world of gleaming silver spires and advanced technology. But instead of the usual bustle of a thriving civilization, an eerie stillness hung over the capital city. "Something's wrong," Mike muttered, his hand resting on his holstered pulse pistol. "Where is everyone?" As if in answer, a scream pierced the air. The team whirled to see an Asterian staggering out of a nearby building, his eyes wild with terror. He took a few lurching steps before collapsing, his body convulsing. Dr. Chen rushed to the fallen Asterian, her med scanner already whirring. She froze, her face going pale. "There's something inside him," she whispered. "Some kind of parasite." Suddenly the Asterian's body went rigid. His head snapped up, and his eyes locked onto James with an intensity that sent a chill down the captain's spine. "You will not stop us," the Asterian hissed, his voice layered with a buzzing undertone. "The hive will prevail." With a sickening crunch, the Asterian's skull split open, and a swarm of insectoid creatures burst forth, their iridescent wings humming. Each was no larger than James's hand, but their compound eyes glittered with malevolent intelligence. "Vespids!" Mac yelled, opening fire with his pulse rifle. The creatures scattered, moving with blinding speed. One landed on Mike's neck, and he screamed as its proboscis punched through his skin. James lunged forward, swatting the Vespid away. But it was too late. Mike's eyes had already glazed over, his expression going slack. "The mission," he mumbled, his voice distant, "must complete the mission." He turned and started marching towards the city center, heedless of James's shouts. All around, other Asterians were emerging from buildings, all with the same blank look, all heading in the same direction. "They're being controlled," Dr. Chen said, horror dawning on her face. "The Vespids, they must secrete some kind of mind-controlling pheromone." James gritted his teeth. "Then we need to find the source of these things and shut it down, before the whole planet falls under their sway." As they pushed deeper into the city, following the trail of the mind-controlled Asterians, James began to feel a pressure at the back of his skull, a whispering voice, urging him to submit, to obey. He shook his head, trying to clear it, but the voice only grew louder. Beside him, Max stumbled, his rifle clattering to the ground. "Can't think straight," the soldier grunted, clutching his head. "It's like there's something in my brain, clawing at my thoughts." Dr. Chen fumbled with her medkit, her hands shaking. "The pheromones," she gasped. "They're affecting us too. We need to find a way to counteract them." But her words trailed off as her eyes glazed over, succumbing to the same mind control that had claimed Mike. James fought against the encroaching fog in his mind, his pulse thundering in his ears. Through sheer force of will, he managed to retain a sliver of clarity, fixing his mind on one unwavering goal, stopping the Vespids, no matter the cost. As they approached the heart of the city, a massive structure loomed before them, a twisted spire of organic and metallic material interwoven in a dizzying pattern. The Hive. Dausterians swarmed around its base like worker ants, ferrying resources and expanding the structure with eerie coordination, and at its apex, James glimpsed a figure that made his blood run cold, a towering insectoid form pulsing with a sickly bioluminescence. The Hive Queen. As if sensing his gaze, the Queen's head swiveled towards him, her compound eyes boring into his. A voice exploded in James's mind, booming and ancient and dripping with malice. "Foolish creature," the Queen hissed. "You dare to defy the Hive? We have existed for eons, and we will not be denied our destiny. Submit, and your end shall be swift. Resist, and you will know agony unending." James felt the Queen's will pressing down on him like a physical weight, trying to crush his resistance, to bend him to her control. But some stubborn core of his being refused to yield, refused to surrender. He thought of all the worlds he had saved, all the species he had helped. He thought of his team now lost to the Queen's influence. He thought of the apex, and the trust she had placed in him. No, he would not fail, not here, not now. With a roar of defiance, James wrenched free of the Queen's mental grip. He charged forward, pulse rifle blazing, carving a path straight to the heart of the Hive. The Queen screeched in rage, and Vespids swarmed to stop him. But James was a man possessed, his every shot finding its mark, his every step bringing him closer to his target. He burst into the central chamber, the air thick with the cloying stench of the Hive, and there, towering over him, was the Queen herself, her segmented limbs twitching with fury. "You cannot win," she snarled, her voice echoing in his mind. "I am eternal, I am inevitable, I am the Hive." James stood his ground, his rifle leveled at the Queen's head. Not anymore. But at the last second the Queen moved, faster than James's eyes could follow. The bolt grazed her carapace, leaving a smouldering gash, but she was far from finished. With a speed that belied her size, she lunged at James, her jagged mandibles snapping. James rolled, feeling the hot breath of the Queen on his neck as he narrowly avoided her bite. He came up firing, plasma bolts peppering the Queen's armored hide. She reeled back, screeching in pain and rage. But even as ichor leaked from a dozen wounds, she pressed forward, relentless, implacable, driven by a single overriding imperative: the survival of the Hive. James fell back, his rifle clicking empty. He reached for another power cell, but the Queen was too fast. She slammed into him like a freight shuttle, sending him crashing into the chamber wall. Stars exploded across his vision as he struggled to rise, his body screaming in protest. The Queen loomed over him, her eyes glittering with triumph. "Now you understand," she hissed, "the futility of your struggle, the inevitability of the Hive. Now you will join us, or you will die." James looked up at the Queen, his vision blurring. He thought of his team of Mike and Dr. Chen and Mac, lost to the Queen's control. He thought of the countless Asterians, their minds enslaved, their free will stripped away. No, it couldn't end like this. He wouldn't let it. With a final, desperate surge of strength, James lunged to his feet. He charged at the Queen, a wordless cry of defiance tearing from his throat. The Queen reared up to meet him, her claws extended, her mandibles gaping wide. And James plunged his hand into the gash his rifle had torn in her carapace, his fingers sinking into the soft, pulsing flesh beneath. The Queen screamed, a sound of agony and disbelief, as James gripped the throbbing core of her being and, with a savage twist, tore it free. The Queen convulsed, her scream rising to a mind-shattering crescendo. And then, in a blast of searing light, she exploded, her essence ripped apart by the violent severance of her connection to the Hive. James was hurled back by the shockwave, his world spinning, his every nerve alight with searing pain. Around him the Hive shuddered and collapsed, its structure unraveling without the Queen to hold it together. Through the haze of pain and exhaustion, James glimpsed his team stirring, the spell of the Queen's control broken at last. They staggered to their feet, their expressions dazed but their eyes clear. "James!" Dr. Chen cried, rushing to his side. "Are you all right? What happened?" James tried to answer, but his words caught in his throat. Because, as the dust of the hive's collapse settled, he saw the terrible truth of what he had done. The chamber floor was littered with the broken bodies of Vespids, their fragile forms crushed by falling debris or blasted apart by the Queen's death throes. An entire species, wiped out in a single cataclysmic instant. And it was his doing. His hand had dealt the blow, his choice had sealed their fate. "What have I done?" James whispered, his voice raw with anguish. I've committed genocide." Dr. Chen laid a hand on his shoulder, her touch gentle but firm. "You did what you had to do," she said softly. "To save the Asterians, to save us, the Vespids. They weren't innocent victims. They were weapons, tools of the Queen's will. There was no other way." But even as she spoke the words, James could see the doubt in her eyes, the unspoken question that hung between them. At what point did the cost of victory become too high? When did they cross the line from protectors to exterminators? These were questions without easy answers, questions that would haunt James long after the smoke of Asteria had cleared. But for now, there was only the bitter taste of a Pyrrhic victory and the weight of a choice that could never be unmade. James stared at the ruins of the hive, his heart heavy with the burden of what he had done. The Vespids were gone, their species extinguished by his hand. It was a victory, yes, but one that had come at a terrible price. He thought of the apex, of the trust she had placed in him, of the delicate balance he had struck between the needs of the Varians and the rights of the predator. He had walked that line before and emerged with his soul intact. But this was different. There had been no balance here, no middle ground, only a stark choice between annihilation and submission. And in the heat of the moment, with his team's lives on the line and the fate of the Asterians hanging in the balance, he had made the call. Now in the cold light of aftermath, he had to live with the consequences. Mike approached, his face etched with concern. "Captain James, we need to go. The Asterian authorities will be here soon, and—" He trailed off, his eyes saying what his words could not. And what? And they would see the carnage, the destruction. They would know what had transpired here, the price that had been paid for their liberation. James nodded, his jaw tight. "Get back to the Valiant, we're leaving." The journey back to the ship was a blur, a numb haze of putting one foot in front of the other. James barely registered the shocked gasps of the Asterian bystanders, the whispers that followed in their wake. It was only when they were safely aboard, the Valiant's engines thrumming as they lifted off, that the enormity of what had happened truly sank in. James slumped in his seat aboard the Valiant, his mind reeling from the weight of his actions. The Vespids were gone, eradicated by his hand in a moment of desperate necessity. But even as the Asterians celebrated their liberation, James couldn't shake the feeling that there had to be another way, a path he hadn't seen. He leaned forward, resting his head in his hands. "What if I made a mistake?" he said, his voice low and strained. "What if there was a way to save both the Asterians and the Vespids?" Mike and Dr. Chen exchanged a worried glance. They had never seen their captain so shaken, so unsure. He stood abruptly, his eyes burning with a desperate intensity. "I have to know," he said. "I have to understand why the Queen did what she did." Before anyone could stop him, James strode from the room, his steps purposeful and determined. He made his way to the Valiant's medical bay, where the broken body of the Queen lay on an examination table, her once vibrant colors dulled in death. James placed his hands on the Queen's cold carapace, closed his eyes and reached out with his mind, seeking the fading echo of her consciousness. It was a desperate gamble, one that could easily shatter his own psyche, but he had to try. For a long moment there was nothing. Then, like a spark in the void, James felt a flicker of the Queen's presence. He latched onto it, pouring all his mental strength into forging a connection. And then he was falling, plunging into a maelstrom of alien thoughts and memories. He saw the Vespids in their prime, a vast and thriving civilization in harmony with the lush forests of Asteria. He felt their joy, their contentment, their deep connection to the living world. But then the visions shifted, darkened. He watched as the Asterian cities expanded, as their factories belched smoke and their machines tore into the earth. He felt the Vespids' confusion, their fear, as their forests dwindled and their nests crumbled. And he understood the Queen's desperation, her rage. She had seen her people slowly dying, their way of life erased bit by bit. The Asterians, in their relentless push for progress, had unwittingly condemned the Vespids to extinction. With a gasp, James severed the link, staggering back from the table. Tears streamed down his face as the full weight of the Queen's memories settled upon him. James burst onto the Valiant's bridge, startling his crew. "Set a course back to the Asterian capital," he ordered, his voice raw but determined. "And get me a line to the Council leadership. We're not done here yet." Over the next several hours, James poured out his heart to the Asterian leaders, relaying the tragic history of the Vespids and the unwitting role the Asterians had played in their downfall. He laid out a bold plan, one that would require sacrifice and compromise from both sides. "We can't bring back the dead," James said, his gaze intense, "but we can honor their memory. We can build a future where the Asterians and the Vespids thrive together." Under his proposal, vast tracts of Asterian land would be set aside as protected habitats for the surviving Vespids. The Asterians would halt their expansion into these areas and work to restore the damaged ecosystems. In return, the Vespids would lend their unique abilities to the Asterians, helping to manage crops, control pests, and pollinate the recovering forests. It was a radical idea, one that demanded a complete rethinking of the Asterian way of life. But to James's surprise and relief, the Council embraced it. They too had felt the weight of the Vespids' extinction and yearned for a way to make amends. With the Council's blessing, James and his team set to work, overseeing the establishment of the protected zones and the delicate process of integrating the Vespids into Asterian society. It was a monumental task, fraught with challenges and setbacks. But bit by bit the plan took hold. The Vespid population, though still fragile, began to stabilize and recover. The Asterians, for their part, discovered a new appreciation for the natural world and their place within it. The once sterile cities bloomed with green as the Asterians embraced a more sustainable way of life. And at the heart of it all was James, the human who had forged an impossible peace, who had found a way to turn tragedy into hope. The Asterians hailed him as a hero, a savior. But James knew the truth. He was simply a man who had learned to listen, to understand, and to fight for those who could not fight for themselves. And in that, he had found his true calling. As the Valiant prepared to depart Asteria, James took one final look at the transformed planet below. The scars of the past were still visible, but now they were interwoven with the vibrant green of new growth, the flashes of color from Vespid wings. It was a reminder, James thought, of the fragility of life and the power of compassion, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always a way forward, always a chance for redemption. With a smile, James turned from the viewport and headed for the bridge. There was still so much work to be done, so many worlds that needed the ICRT's help. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, a moment of pride in what he and his team had accomplished. The galaxy was a vast and wondrous place, filled with countless species, each with their own struggles and triumphs. And as long as there were those willing to fight for understanding, for coexistence, there would always be hope. The pulsing, swirling vortex of the Devourer's realm loomed before James and his team, a maelstrom of chaotic energy that threatened to unmake the very fabric of existence. Steeling themselves, they plunged into the heart of the Nexus, weapons at the ready. Instantly, They were beset by a horde of sentient constructs, beings of pure energy that lashed out with searing tentacles and razor-sharp claws. James, Mike, Dr. Chen, and Mac fought back with grim determination, their weapons blazing as they carved a path through the seething mass. "Watch your flank," Mike yelled, blasting a construct that had gotten too close to Dr. Chen. The team pressed on, the air around them crackling with power, the ground beneath their feet shuddering with each step. Suddenly, a massive energy surge ripped through the passageway, the walls buckling and crumbling. "Go, go, go," James shouted, urging his team forward as debris rained down around them. But Mike, bringing up the rear, found himself cut off by a cascade of rubble. He looked to James, a sad smile on his face. "Get out of here," he said. "I'll hold them off." "No!" James cried, but it was too late. Mike turned and charged into the oncoming constructs, his weapons spitting fire as the passageway collapsed behind him. Grief tore at James's heart, but he couldn't stop now. With Dr. Chen and Mac at his side, he pushed on, fighting through waves of enemies until at last they reached the Nexus core. But as they prepared to deploy the Omega device, a voice rang out in their minds, ancient and powerful. "Stop," it said. "You do not understand what you are doing." Images flooded their thoughts. Stars dying, planets crumbling, their energy consumed by the Devourers, only to be released again, seeding the universe with the building blocks of new life. "The progenitors sought to destroy us," the voice said, "but in doing so they nearly destroyed the cycle of existence itself. You must not repeat their mistake." He looked to Dr. Chen and Mac, saw the same realization in their eyes. There was only one path forward. James stepped towards the heart of the Nexus, the Omega device falling from his hands. He could feel the Devourer's consciousness brushing against his own, ancient and incomprehensible. He turned to his teammates, his friends, tears in his eyes. "Go," he said. "Tell the galaxy what you've learned here. Lead them into a new era of understanding." Dr. Chen shook her head, her own eyes glistening. "James, no, we can find another way." But James just smiled. "This is the only way. The Devourers need a guide, someone to ensure the balance is maintained. And I think this is what I was meant to do." He embraced Dr. Chen and Mac, holding them tight. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." "Remember," his voice echoed even as his physical form faded away, "seek balance, not destruction. Cherish life in all its forms." Dr. Chen and Mac stood there, grief and awe warring within them. Then slowly they turned and began the long journey back to the galaxy, their hearts heavy with loss, but alight with new purpose. They had a story to tell, a lesson to share. The ICRT would endure, no longer as hunters but as guardians, ensuring harmony between all species. For that was the legacy of James Gordon, the man who had given everything to save not just the present but the future. As the Valiant set its course for the Galactic Council headquarters, Dr. Chen looked out at the stars, a single tear tracing down her cheek. "Rest well, my friend," she whispered. "Your sacrifice will never be forgotten." Years turned to decades as Dr. Chen and Mac traversed the stars, their hearts heavy with the memory of James's sacrifice, but alight with purpose. The ICRT, now a beacon of hope, worked tirelessly to maintain the delicate balance James had given everything to achieve. On the anniversary of the historic Vespid Agreement, Dr. Chen and Mac found themselves on the Vespid's homeworld, a place of vibrant forests and soaring hives that had once teetered on the brink of war. They walked among the celebrating Vespids and Asterians, marveling at the harmony they had forged together. But beneath the joyous facade, something felt amiss. The new Vespid Queen, a towering figure with an aura of barely restrained menace, watched the proceedings with a calculating gaze. Dr. Chen, her instincts honed by decades of diplomatic missions, sensed a darkness lurking beneath the surface. Their fears were confirmed when they stumbled upon a hidden chamber deep within the Queen's hive. Inside, row upon row of stasis pods held the unmoving forms of soldiers from a dozen species, their minds enslaved by the Vespid's insidious pheromones. By the stars, Mac breathed, horror etched on his weathered face. She's building an army. Dr. Chen's mind raced, piecing together the clues. The Queen's erratic behavior, the subtle changes in Vespid society, the whispers of discontent from the other worlds, it all fell into place with sickening clarity. She means to conquer, Dr. Chen said, her voice grim, to fill the power vacuum left by the Devourers and rule the galaxy. They confronted the Queen in her throne room, a vaulted chamber thrumming with the psychic energy of 1,000 enslaved minds. The Queen laughed, a sound like shattering glass, as she looked down upon the humans who dared to challenge her. "Foolish creatures," she hissed, her compound eyes glittering with malice. "You think you can stop me? I have seen the truth. Only under Vespid rule can this galaxy know true peace. And now you will serve me." A wave of pheromones crashed over them, a tsunami of mind-controlling chemicals that sought to drown their free will. Max staggered, his rifle clattering to the floor as he fought the invasion of his mind. But Dr. Chen, her mental defenses bolstered by years of meditation and study, stood firm. "You're wrong," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "James showed us the path, not of conquest but of balance, and we will fight to preserve that balance no matter the cost." They barely escaped the planet, their ship dodging swarms of mind-controlled Vespid fighters. As they watched the peaceful world they had left behind descend into martial preparation, Dr. Chen and Mac knew that the fight for the galaxy's soul had only just begun. The Vespid onslaught came swiftly and without mercy. Entire systems fell before the might of the Queen's enslaved armies, their defenders unable to resist the tide of mind-controlled soldiers. The ICRT and its allies fought bravely, but they were pushed back on every front, forced to retreat to ever-dwindling pockets of resistance. On the battlefields of 100 worlds, Dr. Chen and Mac witnessed horrors they had never imagined. Friends and comrades turned against them, their minds twisted to serve the Queen. Cities burned, and innocents were slaughtered or enslaved. The galaxy, once a place of wonder and possibility, became a nightmarish hellscape. In the darkest hours of the war, as the Vespid forces closed in on the last bastions of freedom, Dr. Chen and Mac made a fateful decision. The Omega device, the ancient weapon that had once been turned against the Devourers, could be their only hope. Modified to target the Vespid's pheromone network, the device offered a chance to sever the Queen's control and free the enslaved soldiers. But Dr. Chen and Mac knew the cost. The device would also shatter the psychic bonds that had allowed the galaxy's species to coexist and cooperate. James's dream of a united galaxy would die with the Vespid threat. In the heart of the Queen's hive, surrounded by the writhing forms of mind-controlled soldiers, Dr. Chen and Mac prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice. With tears in their eyes and a final silent prayer for forgiveness, they activated the Omega device. A blinding pulse of energy surged through the hive, through the planet, through the galaxy itself. The Vespid soldiers collapsed like puppets with cut strings, their minds suddenly terribly free, and across the stars, 1 billion beings cried out as they felt the bonds of understanding, the sense of connection that had sustained them for so long wither and die. The war was over. The galaxy was saved. But as Dr. Chen and Mac emerged from the ruins of the hive, they knew that nothing would ever be the same. In the aftermath, as the shattered remnants of galactic civilization struggled to rebuild, Dr. Chen and Mac wandered the stars, their steps heavy with the weight of their choices. They had saved countless lives, but at the cost of the very thing that had made those lives worth living, the sense of unity and purpose that James had given them. The galaxy, once a tapestry of vibrant cultures and cooperating species, now felt like a collection of isolated islands, each wary and mistrustful of the others. The golden age of the ICRT, of understanding and balance, was over. But as they looked out at the stars, Dr. Chen and Mac knew that their struggle, the struggle of all those who believed in a better future, was far from over. James and Mike had given their lives to forge a path of peace. Now it fell to them to walk that path, no matter how dark and uncertain the way ahead might be. For in the end, they knew, the fight for understanding, for cooperation, for the very soul of the galaxy itself, would always be worth the cost. The ICRT had changed the course of history once, and as long as there were those who remembered its legacy, there was still hope for a brighter tomorrow. Dr. Chen and Mac stood on the observation deck of their ship, the weight of their years and their choices heavy upon them. The galaxy stretched out before them, a vast expanse of stars and worlds, each one touched by the legacy of the ICRT. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Mac asked, his voice gruff with emotion. "Using the device, shattering the bonds between species, did we betray everything James fought for?" Dr. Chen was silent for a long moment, her eyes distant. "I don't know," she said at last. "But I do know that James always did what he believed was right, even when it was hard, even when it cost him everything. And in the end, that's all we can do too." Dr. Chen returned the smile, her eyes glistening. "He would. And he'd want us to keep fighting, to keep trying to make the galaxy a better place, one species, one world, one being at a time." They stood in silence, gazing out at the stars, each lost in memories of the friends they had lost and the battles they had fought. In that moment, despite the scars and the doubts, despite the long road still ahead, they knew a flicker of the old hope, the old determination that had driven them for so long. James's sacrifice, Mike's courage, the Valiant's crew's unwavering dedication, these were the lights that would guide them through the darkness ahead. For as long as the memory of the ICRT endured, as long as there were those who believed in its mission, the dream of a galaxy united in understanding would never truly die. Dr. Chen straightened her shoulders, a new resolve settling over her. "Come on," she said, "we've got work to do." Side by side, the last veterans of the ICRT strode from the observation deck, ready to face whatever challenges the galaxy had in store. The fight for peace, they knew, was never truly over, but as long as they drew breath, they would never stop fighting. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.